Just before Christmas, I spent weeks building an MESBG tribute to my favourite Christmas films, featuring Buddy the Elf and Jovie as Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, John McClane as Legolas, Santa Claus as, well, Radagast on sleigh, and of course the Grinch as Beorn the Bear. If you want to see more about how I made and designed and built and converted these models, do check out my previous video. But now, it's time to test them out on the tabletop. I was heading to a parish hall in Nottinghamshire for the Great British Hobbit League finale. It's usually one of the most competitive events of the year because of the way it impacts on the league scores, but today I'd be seeing if all hero armies work, especially when they're festive. After a slightly camp good morning to everyone, it was on to game number 1 against Ernest. Command the battlefield against Boromir, Hurin, Ingold, Beregond and a bolt thrower. And of course, the Festive alliance got straight to work. We realised immediately that there was a significant numbers advantage, quite obviously. So my main focus here was to try and avoid Boromir as long as I can and try and squeeze Radagast through as many gaps as possible and try and clamp down and kill some heroes while I had the chance. I did do some decent work, maybe losing a coin flip or two against Hurin in a well-timed heroic combat, but ultimately once the lines clashed, it was a matter of hoping that Beorn the Bear and Radagast could churn away through the troops for quickly enough while Boromir and friends descended on the lines. Of course, I did try my best to shoot out Boromir's horse and try and panic his steed, but eventually Radagast fell to the massive number of Gondorians in this game. I'd hoped that maybe the efforts of Beorn might be able to assassinate the mighty man of the White Tower himself, Boromir, but alas, it was a tricky ask with so many different Gondorians surrounding him at once. And the Grinch also succumbed. The final attempts were just Legolas / John McClane holding on for dear life with Buddy the Elf reinforcing him from behind a wall. It was just a matter of time. And John McClane too was crushed against the wall by Boromir on his mighty mount, forcing him into the cracks between the bricks. Still, at least Buddy the Elf was having a happy jolly time, hanging around before dancing off to the Old Forest to a disastrous 6-0 loss. If you want to hear the full interview with Ernest, do check out episode 84 of the Entmoot Podcast. It's called Festive Nonsense. But now, on to the lunchtime delights. As ever, absolutely blown away by the scale and quality of hobby on offer at GBHL tournaments, and the finale was no exception. From Mummock war leaders to other magnificent monsters, spooky spirits and the Witch King, to beautiful banners on blended armour. It's a true delight. There was festive nonsense, and not just from me. Check out Alex Temple's video for more on his, and also an awesome Osgiliath board from John Partridge. Outstanding work on his Witch King, Suladan, Black Numenorians, and the Mouths of Sauron hiding underneath the Witch King. There was even some lovely, luscious Last Alliance from Jakob Krochmal, a beautiful, foursome, fearsome player at the tabletops. But it was Alex's beautiful Christmas display that won it out, even if he did try and sabotage things by failing to film me painting the final red nose on Rudolph.
Thank you.
So it was on to game number 2, this time up against David Nixon, who'd brought the Pits of Dol Guldur, led by Azog with a White Warg, a Hunter Orc captain, the Keeper of the Dungeons, and a Gundabad Orc captain as well. Lining up against them, the jolliness of Buddy the Elf and friends seemed to fade away in the face of so many orcs. In fact, the surprise attack took even me by surprise. I wasn't filming it when Azog and friends ganked the Grinch before he even turned into the Angry Bear version of the Grinch. From there, it was a quick combination of combats and furious fighting to surround Radagast on sleigh. Jovie put up a fight, capturing Azog and stopping him from being able to get into Radagast himself. But really, it was just a matter of a time before Radagast came down. Or so I thought. John McClane looked upon as he shot arrows directly into the combats to try and kill Azog or the White Warg, or both if he could. But the lines of Hunter Orcs and Gundabad's and Wargs were descending on him quick. It all looked very much lost soon after, as John McClane was surrounded by so many Orcs, with 2 attacks each. Eek! To rub salt in the wound, even the Wargs had grabbed my objective and were retrieving it over to his side already. But it wasn't completely over. Buddy the Elf and Jovi were holding up the fort, eventually helping Radagast take Azog off the Warg while heroic defensing, using up excessive amounts of might.
I'm going to heroic defence again. So Radagast is spent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 points of might so far. And he's still got 2 left.
Turn after turn of tons of Orcs trying to break through the terrifying aura, channelled of course, Buddy and Jovi blocking off that way, with Radagast heroic defensing against the rest. It felt like an eternity. But eventually, enough Orcs cracked through on a turn where I'd rolled 1 on my refreshing song, and enough 6s were rolled to make sure that Radagast on Slay, Scott Calvin I should say, was removed from play. It was a devastating defeat. 12-0 meant David sent me down to the bottom tables. Once again, full interview in the Entmoot Podcast.
Game number 2 here at the GBHL finale with Lights, Camera, Christmas.
Game number 3 then, and it was against Graham on, well, that's pretty much the bottom tables. Let's call a spade a spade. And Graham was playing me at a game of Recon, and he had Uruk-hai and Saruman and friends against my tiny warband of Christmas festive nonsense. Deploying next to us we had Grimmer Wormtongue, who of course doubles the amount of might you have to spend every time you call a heroic or do anything. Was not happy about this addition, and there was only a couple of things I could do against it. The first was a channeled Nature's Wrath. The second was 1 shot at a panic steed. Luckily, I rolled the 5 on the wound, and off he went.
Excellent.
Sad times for Graham. Despite that early success, I looked upon the scale of the problem at hand in a game of Recon with just a few models to stem the tide of Uruk-hai. We got to work early on, trying to fit into some of the very few gaps there were on the table in an attempt to block off those Uruk-hai, but you could see they were bearing down on me, and Graham had wisely deployed in a very long, thin line of Uruk-hai, so it was going to be quite a task to stop any of them getting past me. But I tried valiantly, Radagast doing some smart heroic combating, if I don't mind saying so myself, churning his way through those nasty, nasty Uruk-hai and putting a dent in the forces of Isengard. But would it be enough? Well, no, it isn't quite enough. There are just so many Uruk-hai and so few Beorns and Radagastas, Scott Calvins, to actually kill enough Uruk-hai to plug those gaps. Even with the help of Buddy and Jovi, plenty of those Uruk-hai were getting off the table edge. But Beorn, with the help of Jovi, did manage to pull off some incredible moves, chopping his way through lots and lots of dudes, and even John McClane, for the first time yet, put up a hell of a fight and killed quite substantially large numbers of Uruk-hai, but there were plenty running off the table still. The final throws of the game saw Beorn versus Lurtz, and understandably, Lurtz packed it in. It was a moral victory to the festive forces. But even Saruman the Wise was wise enough to run off and avoid Baorn's grip. Lights Camera Christmas achieved an impressive kill tally, but 21 Uruk-hai, including Saruman, ran off the board, and only 5 of my guys did eventually make it off the board. Of course, that's the whole army, but it made for a 7-3 loss. You can hear from Graham once again in the Entmoot Podcast. The usual evening Saturday banter happened next, with a few beverages and the inevitable pub quiz and argument over the merits of the Hobbit films. Always a Saturday night treat.
Crispy.
We woke up in the morning to the sights of beautiful bacon baps and sausages, and some other questionable sights. Shout out to Elliot from the Gollum's Gamers. We readied ourselves for our bottom table experiences while top table players rested and thought pensively about the day ahead. As awful Christmas music blared out behind us on the very bottom table, Hamish Gentles, shout out to Hamish, patron supporter, and I got together to play a game of Breakthrough. He had a fearsome looking army with the likes of Saruman, the Mouth of Sauron and Gothmog all lined up behind a solid line of Morannon orcs, with some other orcs in support and even some Crabane up against my Festive alliance. Something told me Hamish must have done something terribly wrong yesterday to be landing on the very bottom tables with such an intimidating army. He quickly got to work surrounding the cast of Elf, while Baorn got munching away into some of his orc heroes. I saw nothing of the kind of evidence that would make me think he deserved his spot at the bottom table, cleverly surrounding Baorn in the most sensible trapping kind of ways, even doing tricksy things like dismounting his Mouth of Sauron. For some reason, I can't remember why. But either way, it's very gamey, isn't it? Very gamey indeed. But also pulling out some of the best magic I faced in the tournament. Well, one of the repeated tricks that was used against me, the old Sorcerous Blast into Radagast on Slay. No matter how much will I threw at it, seems like poor old Santa was destined to be on his bum. Without the killing power of Radagast Slay, it was a matter of my terrifying aura and Buddy the Elf protecting John McClane, I need to get that right, from the charging Uruk-hai line. The Berserkers, the Morannons, but mostly the Berserkers seem to be doing such good work running into Radagast and chopping him to bits.
Cruel mistress.
Damn you, Beesheim dice. As the destruction of the Christmas Alliance became pretty obviously on the horizon, I started coming up with a sort of a mitigation strategy, as it were, to try and make sure I got some VPs out of the tournament. I decided to send the Grinch, who you can see just on the other side of this hill. Yes, he does blend in with the hill, I'm afraid. He is made of flock. And also Jovi, the elf assistant, along with him, because I had a cunning plan. I thought if I could get 4 victory points by just claiming that little, elf objective marker, then it might be the best I could hope for. So I spent an awful lot of will on a refreshing song on Legolas / John McClane, leaving Buddy with just 1 point of will remaining. And Baorn launched himself over the objective and into the Mouth of Sauron. Legolas died, sadly, but that was what I wanted to happen. Buddy survived, but then vanished, disappearing off into his Christmas wonderland, and the same with Jovi, who also vanished in a flash of Christmas joy. This cunning strategy left Baorn with one hope and one hope alone, to barge everyone off the objective and secure it for myself. Luckily, he managed to make his 6 and win the fight, pushing not just 1, not 2, but 5 and the Mouth of Sauron off the objective, and he managed to secure the objective for a 11-4 loss. Top work. By this point, I was wearing my suit in readiness for the GBHL finale prize giving, but as ever, spoke to Hamish Gentles. What a top lad. You can hear more of his interview on the podcast. There was, though, time to get the Santa suit back on to luxuriate in the company of Nathan Talbot, sat on sort of spread-eagled over both myself and a much, much better Santa, Michael Bradford. Back to the games, and it was to the death against Neil. He'd brought a weird combination of evil monsters and heroes of Azog, on the White Warg of course, with a Witch King and Necromancer from the pits of Dol Guldur, and a Troll Brute and a Gundabad Troll. Awesome combination of dudes. John McClane couldn't wait to shoot at them. As we were playing to the death, Azog had very little choice but to avoid John McClane's shooting and go for it hell for leather with his beautiful White Warg underneath him. But of course the monsters and the magicians had to bring up the rear with their slightly slower moving speed.
It looks so surreal.
Quickly, Azog was surrounded. But the magicians did manage to keep up and throw some immobilizers and similar into Radagast and co. while they were waiting to kill Azog off slowly but surely. The monsters also tried their best, the Troll Brute causing some serious damage on the way into Radagast with his trample attack. There was certainly a moment there where I thought Radagast might have had it. This first turn with the Necromancer in combat and his potential to drain the soul of Radagast forced Beorn to spend a point of might on a heroic combat to make sure he peeled Azog off the combat against Radagast. Now only Radagast's heroic defence and some fate points stood in the way of an instant death.
No.
Trial 1.
One wound. Okay. I assume you're going for Radagast himself.
Yeah.
Alright, a fate. Yes. And I knocked over some ruins as well.
But my survival just presented more problems to solve.
The issue here is that the Witch King's called a move, and I've got one wound taken on Radagast with no fate. I've got one will and the Staff of Power and one might. If he gets a wound off his thing and he does the Chill Soul, Radagast dies and I'm in real big trouble.
I gambled on a heroic move and luckily won the roll-off, meaning I could do my magic and refresh them both. The next turn of combat, John McClane surprised us all, not just by winning the fight against the Gundabad Troll, but finishing him off with 2 lucky 6s to kill him. But we could all see where the real duel was happening. It was all about whether the Gundabad Troll and the Witch King and Sauron could bring down Radagast despite his heroic defences. It seemed that wasn't going to happen. Next turn, the Troll Brute fell to the mighty strength of Radagast somehow, but the Necromancer was proving decidedly sticky a customer. I whittled the Necromancer's will, which can also be used as fate, down by trying a banish from Buddy, but ultimately it came down to a big old fight with Grinchy Beorn versus the Necromancer. But who would take the victory? As shown in this highly realistic recreation, it was the bear that eventually won out the day, taking the Necromancer off the table and sending Neil packing for a 10-1 victory to me, my first win of the tournament. Neil was an absolute gentleman of a person to play, as was every player I played across the weekend, but I thought I'd give Neil a shout because he did go home with a wooden spoon. There was still one round left to play though, and it was against Chris, who did so much fantastic work helping Alex Temple build his Christmas display. He was now going to destroy my Christmas display. Absolute disaster. He even brought Alex Temple's Uruk-hai army to the tabletop. A beautiful force led by 2 massive ballistas, some Uruk-hai captains, some berserkers and plenty of crossbows to boot. Instantly it all went terribly as a stray ballista bolt took Radagast off his sleigh. And that was before a barrage of crossbow bolts struck into the Fellowship of Festivity. Mercifully, the big green Grinch blocked the way for the most part of the devastating barrage, but I had to be especially careful in this mission because John McClane was vulnerable. This was fog of war and I had to protect a hero and, of course, try and stop him from assassinating one of my own, as well as killing one of his Uruk-hai captains. But with this ball of death, I was pretty confident I could slam directly into my target, which of course wasn't his Uruk-hai leader, but the other Uruk-hai captain on the table. Chris sensibly risked shooting into some of the combats, hoping to kill Radagast, but instead flinging a berserker into the water, who then promptly rolled a 1 on his swim test and was swept away on the River Anduin. Whoops. Meanwhile, the bear had made short work of our assassination target and was heading towards the 3 heroes at the back of the board, one of which I suspected Chris must have chosen to protect. With Santa Claus long gone though, it was down to just Beorn and the very fragile John McClane to claim those scalps. After some impressive combat rolls into the defensive position the ballistas had taken up, it was a matter of removing some of those big bolt throwers from play to try and kill some of these Uruk-hai captains and siege engineers. But which one was he choosing to protect? Beorn gunned for the one at the back left and John McClane for the one at the back right. But sadly, John McClane was surrounded quickly by a number of Uruk-hai and brought down.
He died hard with a vengeance.
As luck would have it, I did manage to kill the target that Chris was trying to protect. Of course, I didn't get the terrain piece because there were overwhelming numbers of Uruk-hai in theirs, and Chris did safely secure his and kill John McClane for a 6-all draw. What a waste of time after 2.5 hours or thereabouts. But truthfully, it was a cracker of a game. Managed 1 win and a draw over the course of the weekend with such festive nonsense. I couldn't have asked for a better weekend. While this doesn't prove that all hero armies are a waste of time, this one definitely is. You need killing power and plenty of it, not just magical people who can boost up your might support. Anyway, we finished off the tournament with a bit of a GBHL finale, prize-giving ceremony for the best players in the league, but also the most sporting players and the best artisan of the year. So do check out the details on the GBHL blog if you're interested in that. But thank you very much for watching another Entmoot video. If you want to hear more about the games and hear from my opponents, do check out the Entmoot Podcast. And if you really like this stuff, then do head down into the links below to find the Patreon, where you can support the channel and you get prizes and goodies and all that sort of stuff on the regular. Thanks very much again for watching. There'll be another video soon, we hope. In the meantime, Boorarum.